and welcome to our webinar, Use of Aquatics for Improving Linear Speed Mechanics. This is Kyle Valor from HydroWorks. Thank you very much for tuning in. We're excited to bring you this educational content today from our partners at Michael Johnson Performance. This webinar is being recorded, and a recording link will be emailed to all attendees afterward. At the end of the presentation, there will be a Q&A session. Please type your questions into the chat bar in the webinar dashboard on the right side of your screen at any time during the presentation, and I'll read them at the end. At this time, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Michael Johnson is the president and founder of Michael Johnson Performance. Michael is a 4-time Olympic track and field gold medalist, 9-time world champion, and world record holder. After his retirement in 2001, Michael opened Michael Johnson Performance with a mission to help athletes of all ages and all sports reach their full potential, using the same training philosophy and training techniques he used as an athlete. Lance Walker is the Director of Performance at Michael Johnson Performance. Lance is a certified strength and conditioning specialist and a registered physical therapist in the state of Texas. He holds a bachelor's degree in kinesiology and physical therapy and a master's degree in exercise physiology. A well-recognized authority in this field, Lance has contributed to over 10 professional publications in sports science and presented at over 15 national conferences. Lindsay Anderson is a performance specialist at Michael Johnson Performance. Prior to joining MJP, Lindsay served as Director of Sports Performance for Physiotherapy Associates, bridging the gap between physical therapy and performance. She is certified as a strength and conditioning specialist through the National Strength and Conditioning Association and has worked with a variety of athletes to help them reach their performance goals. And with that, I will let Michael begin the presentation.
Thanks, Kyle, and thank you all for joining us. I'll first give you just a little background on Michael Johnson Performance. After my career, after 2001, when I retired, I started MJP. And the idea behind founding MJP and starting this company was to give other athletes the same opportunity that I had, and that is the opportunity for athletes to reach their full potential. I was extremely fortunate in my own career to be able to do all of the things that I wanted to do. When I finished my career in 2001, after the Sydney Olympics, I was still ranked #1 in the world in the 400 and ranked in the 200 meters as well. But felt that really at that point I had done all of the things that I could possibly do in the sport, and I quite simply ran out of goals. And so I looked at that point to the next chapter of my life, and I felt extremely fortunate to be in that position. Not many athletes get the opportunity to end their careers on their own terms, and not many athletes can look back at the end of their career and say, you know, I was able to do all of the things that I really set out to do and accomplish all of the goals that I set. So that was a very fortunate situation that I found myself in at that point, and thought, you know, it would be great for other athletes to be able to end their careers at whatever time their careers might end, to be able to end their careers and feel that they achieved all that they wanted to and they reached their full potential. So with that, I started Michael Johnson Performance, and we, as a company, seek to provide athletes all of the same types of training and the training methodology that I felt helped me to be successful. After years of working with NFL athletes and Olympic and track and field federations from around the world, using other people's facilities, I finally opened up Michael Johnson Performance, our headquarters in Dallas, and our purpose-built facility there, designed and created as a focused training environment for our athletes, and staffed it with coaches and practitioners, including performance specialists with backgrounds in strength and conditioning and speed development, as well as sports nutritionists, mental skills professionals, and of course physical therapy. We train athletes at Michael Johnson Performance in all sports, focusing on the development and improvement in athleticism, speed, strength, power, agility, and stamina from a general and overall athletic development standpoint for our youth athletes, starting at age 9, and focusing in on the long-term athletic development of those athletes for any sport that they may choose to focus on later in their lives. But for our older athletes, and as you go across the spectrum of athletes that we train, when you get into the professional and the elite athletes that we train, then we are developing those same facets of athleticism, but more specific to the particular sports and and in some cases into the particular position that an athlete might play. We train a wide spectrum of athletes across all different sports, professional sports, elite sports, athletes, Olympic athletes from around the world. Michael Johnson Performance is the official training partner of the Dallas Cowboys, the Dallas Stars, Manchester United, Arsenal, even the Williams Formula One team is one of our clients, and we work with several different Olympic federations from around the world. We have operations in the U.S. in Dallas, where our headquarters is, where we're based, also in Ohio at the Spire Academy, as well as operations in the U.K. and China. Later this year, we'll start operations on the African continent and in the Caribbean. We're extremely proud to be associated with HydroWorks and to have HydroWorks as a partner. I believe there's a product out there that can help us more effectively and efficiently train our athletes, then we're interested in partnering with organizations like that. This, again, is born out of my own experience and success as an athlete. People often ask me in my career if I'm more proud of the records or more proud of the medals, and quite honestly, I'm most proud of the consistency and longevity I was able to establish during my career. And I believe that was due to the fact that my coach, Clyde Hart, and I established from the very beginning a need to train as hard as possible each day, but to be able to come back the next day and follow that up with an equally effective and rigorous training session. And this is something that we found with HydroWorks aids and benefits our athletes in that same effort. We are very conscious of the need to regenerate our athletes during the week when they're training, and to be able to maintain a consistent, rigorous training regimen each day throughout the week. And so HydroWorks has been a great partner for us in that effort. So you probably see now, you see up on the screen, the schedule and what Lindsay and Lance will go through, and just to take you through a little bit more of the specifics of what we do and how we actually use HydroWorks as well with working with our linear speed sessions with our athletes. So I will turn it over at this point to Lance Walker, Director of Performance for Michael Johnson, to take you through some more specifics, and I'll be available later on for any questions you guys might have.
Thanks, Michael. The slide you see now, guys, is the presentation we'll cover and won't cover. Just want to set up the expectation. The key thing I think to take from this is that we are known for our linear speed development here. We utilize ground-based activities, but what we're finding is that we're able to integrate the water into a lot of these activities and drive even better results, in some cases results that you couldn't get just on land. So basically, we're going to give some background on the biomechanics and performance factors of linear speed development, both acceleration and top end. Some of the key aspects and modes that we use in our philosophy, the dynamics, the plyometrics, and some of the technical training that we use, both ground-based and pool-based, and show you some of the correlations there that we use back and forth, how we can transition from the ground to the water, and mimic some of the same things we're doing land-based in the water and some of the benefits therein. The presentation is not going to cover how to run a 100-meter dash or other track events. This is speed for sport. So it could be speed for track, it could be speed for baseball, could be speed for football. At the end of the day, what we're not talking about is just track and field, although it obviously it has its role there. The other thing that we're not talking about in this particular webinar is the multi-directional speed and agility that we work here as well. So we're not just about straight ahead speed, and we use the water for multi-directional and rotatory and agility things as well, which is probably a great subject for a future webinar. Lindsay's going to take you now through sort of a general overview of the aquatic training benefits.
Hello, everyone. I just want to say thank you for having me, but also with some of the volume and some of the impact that some of our athletes are going through throughout the week, they can take a lot of pounding. So we have been able to integrate some of the water environment so that they are taking less pounding, but they're also being able to work through these ranges of motion. So because they're in the water, they are going through, they've got a little bit of they're only going through 20 to 25% of his or her body weight. They've got the hydrostatic pressure that's working on their system to help flush their system. And then we're also using that resistance of the water primarily to be able to resist some of these movements.
And when we're talking about sprinting in general, again, these are generalities, but with each of these slides, you can take these generalities and begin to apply them in pool-based, and again, the body weight issues, the buoyancy of the water, the pressures of the water, and even some of the open chain resistances of the water, you can start to put the pieces together and see how this can be a very effective medium to train some of these mechanics of sprinting. Obviously, the linear sprint we divide just so we're getting everything's clear here. There's an acceleration phase. There's that sort of max velocity phase as you transition into acceleration to max velocity, and then you're trying to maintain that top end speed. And at NJP, we're trying to make sure that we train specific modalities in and around all three of those key areas. One of the key areas you're going to see on the demonstrations today is that starting and acceleration phase, which is so much different than running. You really have to tease it out of the mechanics, and those track coaches in the room probably certainly appreciate and understand that. But it is truly a skill that we're training here at MJP at a very high level.
So to give you an illustration of those two separate acceleration into our velocity, so there's going to be some different angles and some different ranges of motion that the body's going to go through. And so this illustration is just showing you how we are phasing out of going from our acceleration into our velocity and some of the components that come along with those two phases.
As the acceleration biomechanical aspects of things, obviously we're looking at stride length, frequency, and ground contact time. The length that you'll see on an acceleration with the stride frequency, there's some balancing acts that go on there. And one of the things that you're going to see with some of the drills in later slides is how we try to balance out an optimized length versus frequency ratio. Unfortunately, in our field, we're kind of enamored with this long stride length. And certainly one of the things that Michael brought to the table in his speed training was his ability to put down more frequency. And so we found out that there's a tipping point there between length and frequency. And too much of one thing can hinder the other thing. The final piece of that is ground contact time, and that's the duration that the foot is on the ground at foot strike to toe off. And we also know that the faster athletes spend the least amount of time on the ground. So again, the water becomes a great medium to work all three of these components, and that ground contact time especially. It's almost like an assisted movement pattern for some of our athletes to teach them how to reduce ground contact time. But at the end of the day, it's still the frequency times the stride length, and one thing that you can start to add on there sort of in the new frontier of speed training is the application of the forces. And so these applications of forces is not only when the foot's striking the ground, but also in the preparatory phase beforehand, sort of lining up the crosshairs on where that force is going to be produced back into the ground. Again, the water becomes a great medium to work all of those things, the frequency, the length, and as well as the force application.
So we're looking at some of the variables here as though athletes are moving through their acceleration phase. So again, we're going through the stride frequency and the length, being able to get off the line and be able to extend through the hip. And then also, as they start to stand up, being able to pull that heel and that knee up at the same time, being able to turn that cycle over. So those ground contact times are less, and those flight times are a little bit shorter as they're moving through that phase.
And if you look at it more specifically now, and this is a track athlete coming out of the blocks, but it's a good video to sort of identify that first phase that Lindsay's talking about, that starting or that overcoming that resting inertia and moving into acceleration postures. You can see the aggressive forward lean postures. You're going to see aggressive toe up, knee up action. You're going to see minimal backside action. So you see as the athlete is driving out of the blocks, the difference being at top end speed, you're going to see more of a cycling action. In acceleration mechanics, you're going to see more of a pistoning sort of action. And so the aggressive angles that you see, the pistoning action of the legs, and then if you can appreciate now the horizontal displacement, that you're going to see a lot of horizontal displacement on the athletes that are good in acceleration, are all things that are going to drive key positions for our acceleration. And again, mechanics that we can work on. Obviously, we all work on land-based activities, and we can also begin to replicate and modulate in the water.
So the angles that we're going to specifically be talking about and trying to mimic are body angles very low in comparison to once you're starting to stand up. We're trying to keep that angle as low as we possibly can as we start to move through. One of the things that athletes are doing better now is staying in that low acceleration zone, and they're staying in that acceleration zone longer. So being able to stay in that angle, what we're trying to do is we're getting that hip extension, and we're measuring that through our thigh separation, being able to get that knee through, keeping that low trajectory through that ankle, and then also trying to get that stride length to be at least one leg length as you're coming off the line.
So here you see the transition from acceleration. That's us off of Powell accelerating and then moving into velocity. You can start to appreciate the differences. And again, the difference ranges of motion, the body positions, the angles, the foot contact position. All these things begin to morph into a different, basically a different biomechanical animal. And there's the acceleration there on the video. Again, acceleration angles, acceleration postures, ranges of motions at the hip, all these things are very different biomechanically, and even force production. This is a very much more of a down force versus a horizontal displacement force at top end speed. And again, these are specific differences that you have to work both in land and on the water if you're attacking a certain thing versus just throwing darts at a wall and hoping somebody gets fast.
So again, this is looking at one of our elite athletes. He's a 400-meter runner. So we're going through the 3 different stages that your body goes through as you're running through. So we've got your early stance, your mid stance, and your toe off. Some different angles that we're going to look for as we're rolling through those. But again, as Lance mentioned before, this is a lot of a down force, and then being able to recover that heel and keep that knee up, along with that arm action, being able to get that elbow through so that knee and that heel can come up and come through.
And this is a neat slide because it does show an athlete those key positions at toe off, mid stance, and early stance. And we can also then use things like dartfish to sort of show the athlete how close to these key positions they're getting. The nice thing about the HydroWorks system again is the camera system showing from the in these sagittal plane views. You can actually use that system with dartfish and draw some of these same key angles. So you're actually replicating a lot of the biomechanical analysis that you're using in ground-based activities with the pool system. Obviously, the key things is we're training speed. Where does this fit? Where does this live in our world? We're gonna prepare the athlete with some dynamics. The power exercises that we're going to show, those usually happen right after our dynamics, and our movement training then happens after power. We wait and do our strength and metabolic training and sort of regeneration training at the end. So if you can kind of picture where, even if you're in the pool medium, where that modality would live, is going to be basically you could be in all 3 of those. And so we have athletes that are doing speed training sessions. You can mimic the dynamic preparatory phase, you can mimic the power, and you can mimic the movement stuff all in the water with the HydroWorks system. And so all 3 of those key big variables there can be attacked using the HydroWorks system.
So starting off with dynamics, some of the things that we are looking for through our dynamic phase is that we're raising that core temperature. We're getting the body aware. It's prepared. We're looking through the hip, the ankle, and the T-spine. We're getting all of those muscles activated, so we're going to upregulate some of those systems. We're going to downregulate some of those systems coming up in our active mobility.
As part of that dynamics, and again, we don't have a slide showing you the video of this, but we'll have some examples in a minute. These are the key aspects within that dynamics section for linear speed training. There's going to be some prehab. And again, you can build these into ground-based before you put them in the pool. You can do some of these in the pool. The posterior chain activation, obviously, we want to make sure that some of those sagittal plane movers are active, so the glutes are active, and making sure that we're able to stabilize the scapulae. The activation of the glutes and obliques together, working in unison, is also important. There's even some of the active flexibility movements you can replicate in the pool. Some of the monster walks and straight leg kick walks that we're all familiar with now, again, can all be replicated there. And as we finally move through that dynamics, the ballistic mobility, where we're actually exciting the nervous system and really ballistically taking those hips and ankles and knees through range ballistically, certainly the water becomes a very safe and a place where the athlete can get very aggressive, where they might not be as aggressive on the land base. The dynamic warm-up, here's some examples of that. And so you can see some of the basic exercises. You see an athlete on the bottom doing a simple pogo hop. It looks like a plyometric exercise. It certainly is a stretch, shorten, cycle thing, but that would live in our warm-up exercises. And again, you can picture these things on land, as well as you can see how you can replicate even the active dynamics. If you take that athlete and put them in the pool on the HydroWorks system, it's the same thing. The nice benefit you get being in the pool when this athlete is moving through range is there's this nice buoyancy effect that allows that hip to travel through range easier. And it's what we find is the folks that are struggling in postures and range of motion on the ground, they seem to be able to get into some really nice and aggressive postures, and especially in these active dynamic sequences in the HydroWorks system. And I know that you rehab specialists in the audience can certainly appreciate that. We see the same thing with our healthy athletes as well. So simple things: active flexibility, the needed chest squeezes, the shin pull squeezes that you see there, backwards quad pulls, wall tractors, forward, backward leg swings. Basically, you're able to replicate all those dynamic things in the pool and drive even some better results, especially when it comes to that active mobility component.
So then after we're done with our dynamics, we're going to move into our plyo progressions. And we have 3 simple progressions that we go through. We're just trying to teach that range of motion that we're wanting the athletes to go through, so that first we're just learning to jump and land. We need to jump and we need to land in the exact same position. Then we're going to move into introducing that stretch shortening cycle that Lance has already mentioned. So we're trying to switch from that eccentric to concentric phase and try to decrease that amortization. Then we're going into the short response. So we're trying to, again, minimize that amortization phase and be able to get that athlete up and off the ground as quickly as we can, because, again, like we said before, that ground contact time is very important. We're trying to decrease that as much as possible.
And this is a perfect place for your HydroWorks system and teaching plyometrics. Unfortunately, we see a lot of athletes coming from high school and college programs that are using plyometrics to develop power, and they're starting on that level 3 without really learning how to handle some of the econcentric changeovers that are happening in levels 1 and 2. And so we've had a huge amount of success with this 3-level progression, even with our elite athletes going back and revisiting level 1 to really teach them the landing mechanics. And man, if you've ever worked with an athlete that has trouble with their landing mechanics on land-based activities and put them in the pool, you instantly notice that they're more confident and they can improve some of those base biomechanical factors of absorbing and storing force into the hip joints and not being so knee dominant, and especially in the frontal plane. And so this leveling of the plyometric progression is perfect to be used in the pool. So here's an example of a couple of exercises that are pretty advanced, I guess, plyometrics that you would see. You see the acceleration-specific type plyometrics that we use. They're focusing more on bounding sort of mechanics and horizontal displacement. The end-stage goal being on those acceleration-specific plyos, the repeat broad jumping and bounding. The max velocity-specific plyometrics, and again, both of these to be done both land-based and in the water, should focus more on vertical jumps and hopping. And so what you see here is a slide of the athlete doing a sort of a horizontal resisted jump, but it's actually what it's doing is it's trying to cue the athlete to pull the hips through space to drive vertically. The end-stage goal on the max velocity-specific plyometrics would be for barrier jumping and hops for height, and again, working on the low ground contact. So again, utilizing the pool, you can see your athletes doing both of these exercises in the pool. Again, being a bit more specific in terms of your jump training, number 1, making it acceleration-specific or max velocity-specific, and number 2, utilizing some of these progressions. And the pool really allows you to progress through these progressions at a rapid rate. You can't make the assumption, however, if they're a level 3 progression in plyometrics in the pool, that they're going to be level 3 on the ground, and we'll talk more about progressions later on. So here's an example of those plyometrics, the lower body plyos, the box jumps, the split. This is an athlete doing the split squat jump that you saw before. They're basically doing just the split squat, not the complete hip flexion cycling through. But again, what they're working on here is a stabilization response. Plyometric, there is no real stretch shorten here. What we're trying to do is work on the landing mechanics and being able to load from a concentric position without having to drop into that econcentric. And again, you got the video feedback that's given the athlete. That's unbelievable. I mean, it's something that you don't get on ground-based activities unless you're integrating the dartfish technologies. And so this athlete is now focusing on more sagittal plane evaluation of hip flexion. We can swivel the camera, obviously the camera view around, and show him some of those frontal plane mechanics. And a lot of our female athletes that are using this exercise, the split squat jump exercise, you're going to see some athletes that struggle in ground-based with valgus. And so this is going to give them, on that lead side knee, some real good frontal plane feedback on their landing mechanics especially. One of the things we notice too is when they're on ground base, in a lot of cases they won't have problems eccentrically loading, but what they'll do is they'll drop into frontal plane valgus on the lead knee on the concentric push. And again, you may see it on the ground when you put them in the water, you won't see it, and that tips you off that they've got some concentric force production issues. They're not recruiting that left glute. They're actually jumping in and recruiting that adductor as a prime hip extensor. And so these are key little things that you can pick up on, especially when you contrast the water versus the land. And in that case right there, if you see it correct on the concentric, you know there's some hip extension issues going on that left side.
So here's an example of some of our upper body plyos, and we've resisted those. Instead of on a land base, we'll use a power ball. On these, we're going to use those water dumbbells, and what Lucas is doing is really pushing out that we can progress into some of our alternating, and then he's also going to go into his flies and his back. So again, initiating that upper body, engaging that core. Again, we're getting some of that feedback on his lower body, being able to stabilize down below, and really being able to exert that power front to back and keeping that motion linear.
This is something that came from Michael as well. One of the things that Michael is known for in sort of really, I consider him a frontiersman when it comes to this concept is the importance of the upper body plyometric and upper body strength productivity as it drives forces down into the track. And so he was one of the guys that was the first really in a lot of cases to utilize the upper body to run. And because of his postural abilities, his stability, his upper body strength, he still credits to this day as one of the reasons why he was so effective was his plyometric and strength training work on his upper body to help drive some of those down forces. And so upper body plyometrics in the open chain here, we'll use medicine balls and things to drive some plyometric ability in the upper body and land base. But again, what you're trying to do here with the bells is you're able to actually throw in some stretch shorten cycle, and they can get much more aggressive here on the stretch shorten cycle because there's not as much of that external load. And again, this athlete's more of in a base stance, so in a very general stance. There he's getting in some more rotary things. It's not just the upper body. I think that's the key thing we notice when we do our upper body plyos for linear speed is that, as Lindsay said, it's linking this down to the pelvis. And again, that's what made Michael so effective with utilizing that upper body strength. It wasn't just doing bench presses and shoulder presses and front and lateral raises. It was his ability to transmit that force, that reciprocating force in the upper body down through a stable pelvis, and it ended up as down force into the track. So it's very, very effective, and this is something, again, the water is a perfect medium to work to drive some of those stabilization plyometric concepts from the upper down into the lower. The speed school now, those are the plyometrics, and typically what we'll do after dynamics and plyometrics, we'll move into acceleration or top-end speed school. And this is basically a way for us to teach athletes some of the tricks that fast people, in a lot of cases, do naturally. What we do is we study fast people, and we study fast people from multiple sports, not just track and field. And we find out that whether it be a football athlete that's fast, a soccer athlete that's fast, or faster than average, even some of our ultra-endurance runners that are faster than average, we find that there's some specific key positions that they all tend to get into. They sometimes use different ways of getting into them, but at the end of the day, these key positions, they're getting into them for a reason. They're just better than us average slow people. And so we found that it's with the right sort of teaching progressions, we can actually train the nervous system at a cortical level at first, and then driving it into a subcortical level to actually assume some of these postures and to use the most efficient ways and means of getting into those postures. Now, at first, it's very cortical. It's very, you got to think about it, and that's very slow. And this is one of those specific drills to acceleration. This athlete's going through the wall drill, and some of the key coaching points that fast people do is they really drive hip extension and they drive front side toe up, knee up action. So this athlete is very focused on getting cueing now to be thinking more toe up, knee up, and then full extension on the backside hip, driving that hip separation. This is actually a switch and a double and a triple that he moves through. And then you can progress this into more marching, skipping, and bounding without the wall. The key thing is he's learning how to drive force into the ground, but he's also learning how to load the hammer or load the gun on the upside leg. And so different than maybe the Dr. Wayans study that talked about it was all about force production in the ground, and it really doesn't matter what happens on the open chain. I kind of take issue with that, I guess, because it does matter. If that gun's not loaded with those specific angles, when he goes to throw it down into the ground, he's not going to be as optimized. And fast people just do it better. So these are things, again, the take-home message for this athlete: punch and don't step. And you can envision this athlete now taking this same drill into the water. So it's the wall series now. Basically, we're using the handlebars in the pool setup. Again, working the same angles. And the wonderful thing about this drill in this setting is that toe up, knee up, is you're actually getting some open chain resistance to the toe up, knee up. You're actually training that cross flexion, cross extension response with some resistance. Again, that's different than land-based. You're not going to get anything but air resistance on land, but it's just sort of like a reactive neuromuscular training when you see somebody that's having a problem getting into a specific position. If it was a squat and their knees were diving in. As a therapist or as a trainer, you know that to cue them to push their knees out, you literally want to push them farther into their compensation. And so in this example here, the athlete's doing the toe up, knee up. The water is resisting that toe up, knee up. So it's actually pushing them into plantar flexion and hip extension. And so what that does is it neuromuscularly cues the body with a very low resistance, but a resistance that's actually is going to be adjustable depending on how much force you put through the water column, is actually going to cue that athlete to get more cross-flexion response. And we all know from our neuroanatomy that better that cross-flexion, that open chain response is, the better and cleaner and more aggressive that closed chain hip extension response is that we're all training in power cleans and squats and all that great stuff that we all know about. And that reflex arc can be strengthened. It can certainly be quickened. And that little resistance that you get in the water column is key to that. And we learned some of this with our track athletes here. We've learned a lot from our Chinese partners. When they brought athletes over, they spend a huge amount of time in the open chain on the flexion side of things. And so this is a great drill to accentuate that cross-flexion, cross-extension response using the wall drill.
So now we're talking about our arm action and some of that thigh separation. So we talked a little bit about that during our speed school. So now we're able to actually get that athlete into those ranges of motion with the assistance of the water. A lot of these motions are very difficult for the athletes to go through sometimes if they're just on land-based training. When we get them into the water, they're able to really get that extension, drive that foot back behind the hip, and really start to open up those hips, which sometimes can prove to be more difficult on land. So they've got the assistance of the water. This athlete here is demonstrating the bounding. So again, this is a level 3 when we get into our A series. So now we've gone through that, and now the one thing that you cannot see is the belt is going and the jets are going. So she's got that resistance as well in this movement. So this would be our jet resisted A series progression. So here's some of our land-based progressions that we've been able to go through. So our coaching points, now we're moving out of that acceleration phase. We're starting to get into our velocity phase. And so we're making sure some of our key coaching points is we're wanting to keep a tall posture. We're going to keep those hips high. And then we're going to really try to bring that heel up to the glute and bring that knee through at the same time. Again, trying to make that cycle as quick and as efficient as we possibly can without letting that ankle escape the knee and start to reach. So those are some of the key coaching points that we're going to start to look at when we get into our velocity phase. So as this athlete is moving across, she's going from being able to focus on bringing that heel up to the glute, and then she translates into bringing that heel over the knee and driving that knee and putting that downforce into the track. So here's our speed school in the water. So we're being able to go into those different zone emphasis. So once we get into our velocity phase, some of the key points and bringing all of these things together. So again, she's got the treadmill on, the jets are resisting her. She's being able to really keep those hips tall, those elbows are coming back. She's recalling that heel up to the glute and then bringing that knee through and using the resistance of the water to be able to get through that range of motion.
This is a great slide to show some of the things that we figured out, again, from studying fast folks like Michael, was that these three sort of cues are things that mean a lot more to the athlete probably than it does to us coaches. The coaches, we like to talk about dorsiflexion and hip separation and all these great technical terms, and we all know that doesn't mean a hill of beans to those 17-year-old athletes. They just want they want one cue that they can think about that's going to help them practice these techniques. Because when they're out running a race or they're running a 9 route on a defensive back, they can't be thinking about these things. And so it's got to be something they practice, and they're somewhat consciously incompetent for a while with it, knowing that maybe they're not running over tall grass or they're not keeping their feet thinking on hot coals. or they're breaking the glass on the backside. So these are three sort of cues that we'll use, and we'll actually use them in those orders. So this athlete, if we would start in this athlete in the pool, again, giving them some sagittal plane sort of feedback, especially on that first cue, is the stepping over the tall grass. And so we'll do emphasis zone work on land-based activities where we give them a chance of 20 to 30 meters of build-up into above 85% of their top-end speed. It's got to be fast. And then they're holding basically that drill number one posture, that tall grass posture, which is their focus is primarily on being tall in the tall grass, stepping over the grass instead of dragging their foot through the grass. And it would be the same in the pool. So we'd line them up, get them up to speed, and then we were giving them some cues. But the nice thing about the pool is they're getting the video cue right there in front of them. And so that's some sagittal plane of that athlete stepping over the opposite knee and not dragging their foot through the grass. Once we become proficient in tall grass running, we'll move to the hot coals running. And so the hot coals running, again, is reducing the amount of ground contact time this athlete spends. The great thing about the water is that makes it very, very easy for them to assimilate. Some of the heavier athletes especially, you get guys that are 250, 275 pounds, and you're telling them to run on hot coals. That's you're speaking cockroach to them. Now you put them in the water, and all of a sudden they begin to assimilate some of those firing patterns with reduced load. Obviously, that's something that we can work on in the pool and exaggerate that. It's almost like an overspeed sort of a stimulation for the athlete, where they're spending very, very small amounts of time on the ground. But it's something that if they've never experienced those reduced ground contact times, it's very hard for them to walk out onto the track and just do it that first session. So the heavier athletes works great with those. And then the third one, obviously, drill number 3 is don't break the glass. You can see this video again from the sagittal plane. You can see the athlete. What we'd want to cue this athlete is the minute the foot's done driving down into the ground, we want to cycle that foot back up and under. And again, the views you saw of Asafa Powell on the previous, in a lot of cases, we'll have a TV going beside them so they can see what a good rep looks like. And then when they watch themselves on the videotape, they can begin to assimilate that. And that's going to help them reduce the backside mechanics at top-end speed. And again, the wonderful thing about the water is if you waste time on the backside mechanics in this drill, you'll never, ever get to the front side because the resistance is just too great. It really accentuates or exaggerates whenever you make a mistake, whenever you do something that's inefficient, and that usually ends up being spending too much time on the backside of mechanics. So I want to back up real quick. We've got a couple of extra minutes here. If you look at, again, all these different slides that talk about postures and mechanics, I think the key take-home message for us is this is not different. I mean, it's not something that, oh, now we're going to go in and do some pool work. We're speed training. Obviously, the ground forces that are involved in this are much, much less. So does this take the place of speed training? Absolutely not. Does it take the place of your weight room training and your plyometrics ground-based? Absolutely not. It just becomes a modality that we can duck back into the methodology to attack specific issues. If it's somebody that's having an issue overcoming inertia, overcoming these ground contact times, if it's somebody that's having issue with frontal plane mechanics or even sagittal plane mechanics, the water becomes a great teaching tool. It becomes a great progression tweak. If we need to tweak the progression and modify it to allow that athlete to experience some successes in the pool is the way to go. To think that we're going to train all of our speed athletes in the pool now and not on ground base that's ridiculous. So obviously we wouldn't be doing that. The nice piece of this too with the pool that we get is we can actually dump in more training volume on an athlete without the negative effects of more impact. And so the nervous system on these particular drills is not taking the beat down, and certainly the joints and neuromuscular system is not taking the beat down that it would on land base. So we're actually able to dump in more volume into a typical training week microcycle than we would without the pool. An example of that would be the work that Galen Rupp did with the Oregon project using the HydroWorks system on some of his tempo run work, mileage work, as well as some of his speed day work, that we were able to actually, and Alberto's group was able to dump some of this into the microcycles, the weekly microcycles that they were on, driving total mileage up as well as total repetitions of these drill sets up. So again, simple things like this one on the ground, we would do this sort of speed training zone emphasis work once a week right now as an example with our NFL guys that we're training. We're going to work 1 day a week with them. Some of our younger athletes maybe 2 days a week. But then being able to come and add an extra day. It could be on a regeneration day. It could be on a day where It's an in-between day that mainly is reserved for tempo work, and we could throw some of these drills into that, and we're adding extra volume of technical training and some of that open chain resistance, that front side resistance that you wouldn't get on the other days. And so it becomes this great little modality that you can add to a full complement of your speed training, plyos, strength training, mobility training, and everything. So again, we want to make sure we're very clear that this becomes just another tool, a great tool to use to accentuate some of the great things that you're already doing with your speed training athletes. So at this point, I think we're right at 40 minutes, so I think what we'd like to do at this point, I know that seems pretty fast. We can go back through some of these slides as needed, but I think I've got Michael, Lindsay, and myself here to answer really any questions that may have through the presentation. So I can open it up for questions at this point.
Okay, thanks, Lance. We can begin the Q&A session now, and it looks like we do have a few questions. The first question here is, do you use the pool only for athletes that are struggling with plyometric form, or for all of your athletes?
We don't like to use the word only around here. I mean, it's unfortunately in our field we've got to be pretty secure in the concept of ambiguity, that there's probably no one right answer. So yes, we use it with those that are having issues. We have it specifically with plyometrics. It's a great way to incorporate plyometrics into the end-stage or mid-stage rehab of some of our athletes that are actually injured. And so it's a way of beginning to work some of that real low-load, stretch, shorten cycle, stabilization response training into their rehabilitation programming and kind of morph them from that environment onto land-based activities. It is a way to retro-progress someone or tweak someone's progression if we notice that they're having some problems in a full weight-bearing environment on our training floor. It's certainly a way that you could tweak back into the progression. But also, if you're, for us and our healthy athletes that are doing great on the floor, in some cases we'll actually use some of these these buoyant plyometric sessions on our in-between day, on our Wednesday regen day. And I know that sounds counterproductive, but it actually allows us to go ahead and fire the nervous system without any sort of loading. And we've seen some good success with that in moderate volumes. And so we're actually able to get an extra day of plyometric training in the water that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do with our athletes just because of the pounding. So the answer to your question is yes, yes, and yes.
Okay. And I have another question here. Do you use the pool for conditioning? And if so, how does that compare to conditioning on land?
We've started to use the pool in conditioning several different ways, and one of the ways that we initially used the regular swimming pool back before we had the HydroWorks was in our group regeneration flushing programs. And so we have an entire group of athletes in our swimming pools doing it, if it was deep water jogging or if it was some of the Aquatics equipment, using the water. Obviously the buoyancy effect is keeping the joint stress down, but the actual pressurization of the water on the tissue coupled with the heart rate response you get with those sort of little burst activities helped us flush the athlete out. What we had used to use in years past was just a 20-minute maybe bike ride or 20-minute low or zero impact cardiovascular machine. And we've gotten a huge response from that very low, long, slow distance sort of thing that we used pre. We've actually taken it to the next step when you put them in the pool. You actually get better recovery when you put them in the pool. So there's a cardiovascular or conditioning component to that as well. So if they're in the pool for 30 minutes, their heart rate zone, they're actually going to be up above that 140, 150 beats per minute, for example, on Wednesday for tomorrow's workout. Pretty much for the entire 30 to 45-minute session, they're going to be above that zone, and they'll be spiking in the zones in the 170s and 180s. So you're actually getting a stimulus that you wouldn't otherwise get with the normal. The other side of that is we're actually doing some of our VO2 max or our VO2 power training in the treadmill as well. We're actually doing some 30-second strides, some 20-second strong runs, and some 10-second sprints with a 1-to-1, 1-to-2 rest-to-work ratio. And we're seeing some nice success with that as well. The third piece of our conditioning that you can use here is some of your lactic system training. And so we'll actually take sprints, repeated sprints of over 20 seconds at a time with the jets on and drive that lactic system up with a 1-to-3 work-to-rest ratio. And again, the wonderful thing is really you're putting the crosshairs now directly on the metabolic system, and you're taking the pressure and the stress off the joints. And again, sometimes when you're conditioning big athletes, they're not going to stress their metabolic system because that ends up not being the limiting factor in some of these guys. Or gals. It's their joint systems or their muscular systems or their tendon systems. So really, the water as a medium allows them to really push the limits on the metabolic systems and reducing the reliance or limiting factors from other systems.
Okay. And it looks like I have one more question here. Do the motions learned in the water translate easily to land, or is there a long transition period?
You know, we don't know yet. If you said it was the same for everybody, I'd be lying to you if I knew that. It's some of the athletes you're able to transition very easily, and some of the other ones it takes a little bit longer time. I think that's a great room for some study to find out how it crosses over. What I can tell you from experience working with anti-gravity treadmills versus the pool is the crossover from the pool seems to be better for some reason. We played around with both systems, and I think one of the things, especially on the acceleration stuff that you get, now maybe jogging and long-distance running, I don't know. I haven't looked at that because, to be honest, we don't coach distance running and jogging. I mean, that's not for us something in our wheelhouse. But this acceleration thing, these boundings and acceleration mechanics and top-end mechanics, the addition of the water kind of resisting that cross-flexion response, we've really seen, as I said, it's almost a reactive neuromuscular effect where it actually potentiates the nervous system. It actually makes it better once you get up on the ground because now, again, you feel as though that resistance has been taken away, and it actually accentuates that cross-flexion response. That's not something you get on an anti-gravity treadmill, and it's something, then again, the other piece of that on the anti-gravity treadmill that you sometimes get that you wouldn't get here is when you're putting downforce into the ground. Really, you're able to really put as much downforce into the ground as you want to in the water, and you can really be aggressive from the open chain to the closed chain here. When you're using the anti-gravity treadmill, sometimes you're not able to be as aggressive just because of the way it's set up. It tends to be a little bit better or lends itself better to water training, especially for acceleration mechanics. But those are great questions, and again, something to be studied would be sort of that: how does it affect both acutely and chronically the reps that would happen onto the ground? It would be a great study for some PhDs to look at.
All right, great. Well, it looks like that's all the questions that we have. So I would like to thank our presenters, Michael, Lance, and Lindsay, and our sponsors, St. George's Park and Perform of Spire Healthcare. And I'd also like to thank all of our attendees for joining us today. When the webinar ends, a survey will pop up, and if you wouldn't mind taking a moment and filling out that survey, that's very helpful to us as far as seeing how we did and finding future topics for future webinars. And as I mentioned before, you'll all receive a recording of today's webinar after the session that you can watch anytime. So thank you very much for attending, and have a great afternoon. Bye.